Hello everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which will see the release of F1 the movie. I was able to see this film on Wednesday for the fan special premiere, and overall it's a pretty fun time. Gave it a 75% rad score over on Criticlist, and as of right now on Criticlist, in fact, of the 12 reviews out there, the average score is a most excellent 85%, so really no terrible reviews for this movie so far, most of them in that rad category and several also in the most excellent category as well. I have some issues with the movie. I think that it is a bit long in the tooth. It also is, it's kind of lacking that magic that was able to be present for Top Gun Maverick, which is the same movie that Joseph Kosinski, who's the director of F1, was able to also make. And so I do think that there is a lot to praise in the movie, but there is also some criticism with the story, the pacing, and again, I think that runtime probably doesn't help it all that much either, because it really just makes those pacing issues and story issues that much more prominent. That being said, it is a fun time, and I think that it'll do relatively well for the kind of movie that it is. That being said, right now, it's looking very interesting as far as the box office battle and as far as what this film is going to make, because on the one hand, you've got these, so-called box office experts out there who are saying, hey, this traditional tracking has the movie only about maybe at $30 to $40 million. I think I've heard some even go upwards of around $50 million or so. Well, Box Office Theory has kind of been keeping this one close to the chest, because usually they have their theories. Usually Sean Robbins has his Box Office Theory, as the name implies, out usually on that Wednesday before a movie comes out. In this case, he had to wait all the way until late last night into the morning today to actually release this, and so I was very surprised by that, but I think it's also because there's a lot of unknown factors when it comes to this movie. Again, it is being pretty well received so far by people, but the number is also, for its budget, still quite low, right? He is projecting for the film to make around $71 million domestically by the end of this weekend. Now, one of the things I do love about Box Office Theory is that he does give a bit more information here as far as what the traditional tracking is. So right now, the industry, this is what the trades are putting out there, sometimes even the studios will put this out there as well, are saying the film will make between $40 and $50 million. For him, though, he thinks it's going to be between 55 and 74, which is about on par where his earlier tracking, his long-range tracking and forecasting had also had this movie. And so, again, sounds like it's okay on paper because of, again, it's a movie about F1 racing in the United States, which is not as big of a property, right? It's not as really big as an entity for us here in the States as it is across the world. That being said, it is still a Joseph Kosinski movie. The trailers for it have been very, very good. You have Brad Pitt starring in the movie, amongst others. And so this is, I think, something that's going to be interesting to follow down the line, but we still have to also be honest and say not really the biggest opening, especially for your budget, which some have reported as much as $300 million and as little as $200 million. So between $200 and $300 million means this movie has to make between $600 and $900 million just to break even at the box office. And while some are going to try to argue, well, hey, F1 racing is huge in Europe and across the world, and that audience is going to show up in droves for this movie. Here's the issue with that. Okay, Ford v Ferrari came out back in 2019. That also dealt with a type of racing that is, again, also very popular in Europe. Even the name Ferrari itself is in the title. And yet, even when it came to that movie, Italy was actually towards the bottom end of the international numbers for that movie. It was not even in the top 3 biggest countries, at least according to the numbers.com. And in addition to that, the international numbers overall were not all that impressive. Now, again, I think part of the reason could be because it's focusing on the Ford in that story. And so because of that American focus, maybe European audiences weren't interesting. Well, with this movie, who is the lead? An American. So I do think that could potentially have the same impact on it. Now, again, I'm not saying the movie's going to flop. I'm not saying the film's going to do terrible. But as of right now, $55 to $74 million domestic on that kind of a budget is not very good. Add to that the fact that, hey, right now it's projected to make around $115 million in its global opening. Now, personally, I think that it'll do better, right? Because they are assuming, the trades are assuming that much lower, like $40 to $50 million domestic opening. So do not be surprised if this film is able to open up to maybe 130 or even 150 globally. But even then, remember, most films tend to make about a third of their entire box office in their global opening weekend. And if that were to hold true, yeah, that's not going to get you to $600 or $900 million. So, hey, word of mouth has to help this movie. We'll have to wait and see for the second weekend, especially. This is that kind of movie where, hey, Top Gun Maverick started off slow and was able to gross well over $1 billion. This is not looking to have the same kind of opening that movie has. It's also not looking to have the same kind of buzz that movie has. That being said, there is still that factor. Could it have the it factor for some people? We'll have to wait and see. Didn't have it for me, but this could easily be a movie that could be a big surprise hit. I'm not going to deny that it has that potential, but right now, as far as just general projections and the numbers that we have available to us, things are not looking too great for this movie. But again, I think it's a pretty darn good time. Now, what is interesting is that M3GAN 2.0, right? This sequel was very much fast, greenlit. So it was fast lit after the first movie came out because it was a huge unexpected success. No one thought that a January release, I believe this film came out in January a couple years ago, and no one thought that it was going to be able to do much of anything because January is the month where films go to die. And the fact that they were able to greenlight this so fast was interesting. What is also interesting is that this is expected to have a much worse opening weekend than the original movie. If you go back to the original M3GAN film, that film opened to $30 million domestically. So even though it was slower, slow weekend, no one was really expecting much of anything for the film. Let me just also tell you, it was a January release, right? It came out very early January. Again, most of the time, there's really nothing that comes out. People don't usually go to see the movies. That was one of the highest grossing films and one of the best weekends for a movie in January at that time. And again, it went on to make $181 million. And again, no one would have expected that. The film also had a pretty modest budget of around $12 million. Now, apparently they've doubled the budget for this movie, and they're not expected to get double the results. So it's interesting that the first film was a huge success, a huge hit, and they decided, hey, let's capitalize on that, and not looking like they're going to be doing that. Now, again, that doesn't mean the film's going to flop or anything like that, right? We have to wait for the international numbers to come in, but as of right now, $16.5 million for that movie. The number 3 spot this weekend. It's a PG-13 film behind How to Train Your Dragon. Again, not the best of looks. How to Train Your Dragon is expected to get the number 2 spot, as I just mentioned, with $21.4 million there, a 41% drop from last week. The film Elio. Now, here's the interesting thing, all right? Elio is expected to have a 37% drop. Now, some are going to say, wait, isn't that really, really good for a week 2 drop? Percentage-wise, absolutely. But look at how low that number is. Even if you were to have 30% drops from this point going forward, which would be very, very good, you're still dropping from a very low starting point. And so even though this might mean, hey, it's got a really good chance of passing a film like Strange World, right, doing much better than that movie ever did, okay, you might have that potential chance. This does not necessarily mean, though, it's going to get to the $400 or $500 million that the film Elemental was able to get to, because that film legged out, right? That film had a bit of an advantage, right? Had an extra $10 to $20 million in its opening weekend. So that does make a huge difference, because that's a higher number that you're dropping off of, about a third each week. So that is, again, I think, going to be a huge factor there. Also, the film really hasn't been that well received. Again, a lot of criticism of the movie, and I think well-founded. I didn't hate it as much as other people. I gave it a decent score over on Criticlist myself, because I thought, hey, it's still an animated movie, and it still has a lot of things in here that kids are going to enjoy. But for the adults, again, I think there's a lot of problems with it. The story, the characters, really just a bit of a mess of a movie altogether. What's also interesting is that 28 years later is seemingly not going to be a hit here. So this is expected to drop 67% in its second weekend. That is really bad for a film in general, let alone a lower budgeted movie like this one. This shows you, hey, guess what? The fans don't like this direction. They do not like what's going on with this. We were waiting a long time for this movie. We didn't really get what we wanted. We didn't really get the kind of movie that you could have had. Again, 28 years later, there's so many things to do with that concept. And Danny Boyle instead decided to get very artistic with it and decided to add in a bunch of weird things and really make it too much of a zombie movie, right? One of the reasons why we really like the other movies is because it kind of goes in that in-between of, is it a zombie movie? Is it just an infection movie, right? Like, what is actually going on? And obviously some would say, oh, you're just, being a little bit nitpicky there. That might be true. But again, I am the critic who is a cynic, so I am cynical with a lot of these things. That being said, I think a lot of fans will be honest and say, yeah, this film really didn't do it for me, man. The ending of the film just comes out of nowhere and is just crazy. And also the fact that Nia DaCosta is the one randomly directing the second movie of this trilogy of 28 years later movies doesn't really raise a lot of hope for this either. So don't be surprised if this film kind of just drops off a cliff. It had a much higher budget than the last movies. I don't think it's going to make it back based on these numbers here. And I don't think the film next year that's coming out is going to do all that well. I think it's going to do a lot worse in general. That Nia DaCosta name, I think, is going to really harm and hurt the prospects of that that film. And if it's as experimental, as artsy as this one is, it's not going to look good. Going over to Box Office Pro real quick, we got F1 with 45 to 55, so they're much more in line with the traditional tracking. And again, I think it'll do better than that. I think word of mouth will help this movie quite a bit. M3GAN at 18 to 25, again, much worse than the original, though they have the high end of 25 million. How to Train Your Dragon at 16 to 20 million. Box Office Report, their numbers came out finally last night. They are a bit closer to what's going on with the trades, right? So F1, they have at $53 million, How to Train Your Dragon at 19.5, M3GAN at 15. So I think one of the reasons why also Elio at 11.2, so a much higher drop. So again, if it's dropping in this case, oh boy, we're talking catastrophic. It's already going to be bad no matter what because of the budget of the film. Because again, $300 million is what's been reported before, and they can try to run with $150 million or so. 150 million, that's still too much to make up. But anyway, going back to F1, this might be why I think Box Office Theory waited so long to release their numbers, because remember what happened last year with a couple years ago with Barbie, right? Barbie was a film that the trades and the tracking, the traditional tracking, had it at a pretty low number, right? Had it well under $100 million. I want to say it was at one point 60 to 70 million was what was expected, and then it ended up making well over 100. Well, what were one of the few sites that was projecting well over $100 million in its opening? Box Office Theory. Now, they weren't even fully right there because it actually made even more than what Box Office Theory thought. But I think he was kind of holding this off a little bit, trying to see what other people would put out there, maybe thinking, hey, I don't want other people to maybe be influenced by what I'm kind of seeing out there. And so again, just like usual, I would probably go in line with what he is projecting here. I think there's a very good chance for F1 to do much better than anyone could have expected. But again, as I said before, $115 million, a budget of $200 to $300 million, that's still not quite there. So that second weekend is going to be huge for this movie. If it holds well next weekend, sky's the limit for what could happen, but it has to make quite a bit of money. And speaking of that, let's go to the charts because we love charts here on OMB Reviews. And so since the range is between $200 and $300 million, I have the budget right now. Ooh, too close. Very much too close. I have it at $250 million with the line through it. That just means we don't officially know what the budget is. But as you can see, 600 to 900 million, average $750 million is your break-even point. Opening up to 115 million, even if it opens up to 150 million, is not going to quite get you there if it has an average run and average release. Now again, that's a big if there. If it has that magic run that Top Gun Maverick was able to have, then we have a whole very much different story, but we'll have to wait and see on those numbers there. M3GAN 2 costing 22.5, so the range is between, I think, $20 and $30 million, or sorry, $20 and $25 million is what the range is being reported there, so not too much higher of a budget than the original, but still a little bit of a higher one. $67.5 million is its break-even point, and again, opening weekend's not looking all that great, so we'll have to wait on that one. Jury's still out. And with the projections for 28 years later, I could say, yeah, 28 years later likely is going to be theatrically a flop based on these numbers. And that Elio, even with that 30% hold, also theatrically is going to be a flop as well, because if you look at the current numbers here, right, as of the last update from the numbers.com, Elio is at around 43.3. That's $228 million in the red. So that is not a very good number to have. $228 million in the red, whereas 28 years later, it was only $56 million in the red, but because of such a high drop-off, it's not going to make that money back, at least theatrically. Now, again, VOD, Blu-ray 4K sales, that could probably make some of that up, but I think this film should have been a lot bigger. I think the studio probably expected this film to do a lot better. The fact that they greenlit 3 of these movies, right, to be in the 28 years later trilogy of sorts, shows them that they had a lot of confidence in Danny Boyle and in Alex Garland especially, but again, I think that he just did a little bit too much here, and so it's not looking all that great. How to Train Your Dragon, according to the numbers here, is still not yet hit its break-even point. That will change this weekend. I think that by the end of this weekend, this film will probably be north of $500 million, like $450 million or so by the end of this weekend. So still doing very well. Not going to hit $1 billion, but hey, it's going to make its money back this weekend, so that's very, very good. And then, of course, the other films on here are still where they are. And $915 million for Lilo and Stitch at this point. As I said, $1 billion still on the table. It's going to just eke it out if it does get there, but also it wouldn't surprise me if it doesn't either. But anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about this? I'm about to go on a week-long trip to St. Louis and to Tulsa to go see some of the wife's family. So let me know your thoughts on any of these movies in the comment section down below. Do you like F1? Do you like M3GAN 2.0? What are you planning to see this weekend? Again, I would recommend F1. It was a pretty darn good time. at the theater for me and for the rest of the crowd that was in there, though it is on the long side and again may not be for everybody. But because of that, the fact that I'll be out for the week, it means box office breakdown video may not happen this week, just because of that, being on the road factor. I'll try to record something if I can. At the very least, I will be able to hopefully get an article out for geeksandgamers.com. That'll be out on Sunday, usually Sunday evening, latest Monday morning, so that way you get the full breakdown of what we saw this past weekend. So anyway, thank y'all very much. Please pray for me as I travel. Driving with 2 young kids is especially going to be very interesting, but you guys are great, amazing, beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed feast today of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribe Star people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. Also a huge shout out to my newest YouTube member, Raichu. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.